I'm a group product manager within the powerapps organization. And my group, we're referred to as the Edge team. We are sort of the edge of expanding growth for the powerapps platform. And two major growth fronts for powerapps today are cards, which are the main topic of our conversation today. But also in my group, we do powerapps mobile, which is about 1.5 million monthly users right now. And a lot of exciting stuff coming up on mobile as well. And also in the year ahead, we're going to see some interesting intersections of cards and mobile. So let me get into it here. Quick peek, just to ground it. This is the tool we're going to be talking about today. This is the cards environment for powerapps. I'll come back to this with a lot more detail in a minute. Some of the stuff I'm going to go through, I know this is probably the smartest group on the planet in terms of already knowing about adaptive cards. At the same time, I just want to walk through sort of how we were thinking about adaptive cards leading into the project, which will kind of give you a sense of the depth of our investment and how far we see this going. So a little bit about powerapps for folks who aren't in the powerapps team today, or aren't using the powerapps daily today. It's a low-code, no-code platform. This is part of a really long legacy of some of my favorite products in the software industry, which are tools which are aimed at empowering more people to do things with code, and particularly non-professional people, i.e. people who don't have a computer science degree or don't have the word engineer or programmer in their job title. But a lot of it, what we do to make this possible is, a lot of it centers around, graphical ways of building logic for applications. Then a lot of sort of Microsoft style global scalability. So it's really important to us, even if you only know one line of Power Effects and your app is incredibly simple, that you can still deploy your app around the world with, compute available globally, great scalability. And if you pick up millions of users, we're there to grow with you too. But I wanted to also talk about, some of that rich history of low code and no code app building stuff. First with something from my own past, which is a project called Kodu, which I did at Microsoft in about 2006. This is a visual programming language we did on the Xbox for fourth graders. So what you see here is a way of instructing a robot how to move around and collect apples in the world. Not part of the cards project, but just to say there's a lot of really interesting visual tools out there. I'll mention a few like HyperCard, Visual Basic, of course, here at Microsoft, but all the way back to Scratch, Smalltalk, and even a program called Logo that was used in the 60s to teach elementary school programmers how to code, and is still being used today. So, this goal of making code available to more human beings across the planet is a really noble one. It really motivates me and inspires me. I'm really stoked to show you guys what we're doing with that and the intersection of cards. So cards, again, you guys know this stuff, but when you go around getting a new project funded at Microsoft, you do a lot of slides like this that talk about, hey, there's something happening here. There's a big wave. And even though adaptive cards is something that Microsoft has been involved in from the start, in fact, in our cards product I'm going to show you today, it was one of the principal engineers to start it out was Tom Laird McConnell, who is the inventor of the bot framework, and along with a few other folks, like Matt Heidinger and David Clough here at Microsoft, were the inventors of adaptive cards together. But the real important thing to see here is these huge numbers. In May of last year, we don't measure this continuously. In May of last year, we were seeing 1 billion cards per month fly around just within Outlook. So we know that you're telling us, the market is telling us, the world is telling us that there's something really interesting about adaptive cards. And this is in a world where we have millions of ways to do apps and web pages and native things. And so we've really been digging in for quite a while now to really understand what's important about adaptive cards and also what's missing from the current picture. So this is really familiar for you guys. This is the open source adaptive cards designer on the left. On the right, we show a couple of cards being delivered in Outlook and Teams. And, of course, you guys know the standards here. It's like that the card can take on the native appearance of the environment it's rendering in is really important, that it's a nice, simple layout model, that cards are really small, 26K, you can render them easily, even in high-performance surfaces like a search experience. And these are just some samples from across Microsoft of all the places cards show up. But honestly, I've been on this project for 1.5 years. I still, every week, am finding new places we're using adaptive cards just in Microsoft. And I really want to, I'll definitely be turning on the chat here and trying not to multitask too much, but one of my main motivations in being here today to share with you guys is to learn from you about the scenarios you're working on, about what's interesting to you about adaptive cards. So please feel free to be chatty. Feel free to shout out questions and topics, and really, really hope to learn from you. This is just a kind of a core scenario we anchored on, one that we wanted to be able to achieve, and that we pretty much can achieve today, is a card for doing an expense report approval. Some of the criteria we were looking for is, of course, it appears in context like all cards do, but also you see here, that we want to be able to integrate Dataverse entities directly. So Dataverse you can look at as the sort of the global data backplane across all of Power Platform. It's really a unifying thing. There's a lot of UI to make it easy to work with data in Dataverse, and of course it scales like mad for you. So cards you will see are going to be increasingly closely integrated with Dataverse, just to make it easier to achieve a lot of core scenarios. But again, in the card, you see, we want to have live data, and then we want to have direct actions. And any place you want to have direct actions, so we really have full CRUD operations within Teams and Outlook environment today. You can read data, you can write data, et cetera, et cetera. It's really important that you have a tight security model to go along with that. And so we're starting with a simple security model, which is a viewer-based security model. Every person who's looking at the card has different access privileges to the data in the card. And you can either change the display dynamically to show them different things based on their access level, or they simply won't be able to see it if they're not authorized to. Now, we want to make it really easy to use cards to share information, but we also want to make it really easy for IT admins to control, how many data sources you can have flowing around and things like that. And that's one of the reasons we decided to integrate into the Power Platform, because it's sort of best in class in terms of giving management tools for managing the security environment for your apps. I'm going to skip the polls. I didn't go through the technical setup for those today, but here's the questions to show you what are your biggest challenges using adaptive cards. People want to type stuff in. I would love to hear it. We will absolutely be looking at these notes afterwards. It's a great opportunity to influence the product. But I have some guesses because I've talked to a lot of adaptive card users. And this is kind of where we came up with, we're talking to the community about a year ago. What's not there? What can make this a lot better for you? I mean, obviously, what's there is fantastic and a complete story, but what can we do to make it even more accessible and more powerful for folks? So these are the things we came across and heard from folks and encountered ourselves. One is adaptive cards is great for a UI spec. It's kind of like a new, tighter, leaner, faster HTML in many ways. As a longtime HTML guy, I know that if you look into a browser, you can probably find 300 different ways to lay out a row of items. So HTML has become very big, and solutions delivered in HTML inherit a lot of that complexity, as do engineering organizations that have to navigate it. I'm a big fan, of course, of UI and animation and those kind of details, Flexbox and technology like that. They're fantastic, but it's also really nice to work in an environment like adaptive cards where we have a really simple layout mechanics where everything's sort of responsive by nature, and we want to really build on that. Adaptive cards can only be displayed in Microsoft products. Not true, actually. You can, if you have a website, you can host adaptive cards on that website. One of our customers that I talked to using adaptive cards, he had a website where his employees would log in and see their to-do items for the day. And so he had a gallery on their webpage that would say, here's your to-do items. And each to-do item was an adaptive card. So adaptive cards is an open standard format. It's used interestingly enough, far away as Instagram. So you can build adaptive card support into your own applications. Now, can you build adaptive card support into Gmail? Not unless you own Gmail and have the source code for that, right? Yep, JP, we're thinking along the same lines there. So it's freely available for folks to host themselves, and that's a really important use case for us. We're focusing a lot on Teams in our initial waves because Teams is growing like gangbusters. Also because in some previous lives, I worked in a group at Microsoft called the Social Computing Group. So we studied this rise of social networks before Facebook came along. If anyone remembers Friendster and Orkut and things like that. Social environments are kind of, I think, the leading edge of user experience platforms today. And chat is really the foremost among social environments. So if you look at things like WeChat, a hugely popular social network in China, it's an operating system. You can do everything in WeChat. It's kind of universally extensible. And This is part of this, sort of dynamic in the software industry that I think of as attention aggregation, which is there are increasingly a smaller number of apps in which people spend more and more of their time. Slack is one I've used at other companies. Teams I love today. I do think it's better than Slack, honestly. These modern environments, some of the things that characterize them is multiple social groupings, right? You have my one-to-one chats with people. I have a daily casual chat, maybe I do with some friends. I have different chats for my teams. They all have historical context, and they go in and out of meetings with us. So we go into a meeting, we have a chat, we work on some stuff, and then often after the meeting, I'm going back and looking at that chat and pulling data out of it. And so if you look at those kind of modern workflows that evolve around what are really these social patterns of interaction, we really wanted to develop an app platform that was targeted to embed inside these. And so, of course, Adaptive Cards gets us most of the way there. What we're going to talk about the rest of today is what's the rest of that platform? How do we really make this sort of industrial strength platform? So some of the other stuff that's missing, if you've gone and tried to do actionable cards that have deep actions or multiple steps and things like that, the two most popular routes we see for that are people writing their own bot framework bots, right? That is the core way, because initially Adaptive Cards were invented by the bot framework team as a way to surface small snippets of just enough user interface inside the chat environment when you're talking to a bot. We all know when we've been talking to a bot or a phone tree or something, we just want to push the button and say next step, please. So that's kind of where cards came from initially. But the bot framework is a pretty heavy lift if you just want to make a simple card to gather T-shirt sizes from the team. Then the other major approach we see people using for building logic inside Adaptive Cards is Power Automate, which of course we love because it's part of the Power Apps platform. I love the Power Automate UI. That team is really fantastic. And so we've looked at what some folks have done, and probably some folks on this call, to build complex logic inside cards, but in Power Automate. And there you get into some challenges because Power Automate is an incredibly powerful tool. It wasn't developed with the single purpose of making it easy to build card logic. So some scenarios when you have cards that have multiple states, for example, multiple pages, get a little hairier. Another thing we heard is that it's hard for people to once they've sort of wired card into their flows, sometimes hard to extract that to use into another scenario. So modularity, portability of cards are kind of pro-level problems we wanted to solve. Cutting and pasting large blobs of JSON. It's really cool to have the JSON because you can just whack something really quickly if it's not working right. But really easy, miss that closing, brace. Or you mix up your versions, large blocks of text that aren't managed in version control can get a little scary. And then advanced features. There are, lots of advanced things you can do with cards, but we didn't see people using them as much. So a lot of cards we see are static. They're just for delivering information. Maybe they have a button to take you to another page, but in terms of like, hey, let's do a calculation, show you a result, branch to a different screen based on what happens there. You can do that all with cards today. They were designed for it, but it's too hard, honestly. And so that goes to the reuse and error handling, and that goes to lifecycle management all up. And that lifecycle management is something that Power Platform is really strong on. So by integrating with Power Platform, we get access to all kinds of dashboards and admin centers to be able to manage what citizens are allowed to do with cards inside your environment. This is the simple sort of, Marketese kind of block diagram. But really on the left, what we see is, people, before we brought out this new cards model, they, use the tools to build the Adaptive Card UI, and then they either build a bot framework, or as I talked about, use Power Automate, or they connect to custom endpoints, all fairly pro, except the Power Automate one. And after really kind of our value prop is, hey, it's a single tool. You go into that tool, you design the card, you add logic to the card, and then you deploy the card wherever you want. So no switching to Visual Studio to build a bot framework, no calling up the pro code team to stand up an endpoint for you, and no managing Power Automate in a separate window or anything like that. And again, we think there are a lot of scenarios where Power Automate is absolutely key. Power Automate is a core pillar of our strategy moving forward. So what I'm really getting at is making it a lot easier to work with cards in Power Automate and do it in kind of an industrial scale. So, down to the nitty gritty of what we're adding. So we have this thing called a card engine. We call it card bot internally. We also call it the card service. But really what it is it's the universal backend for cards. So it's a stateless service. That means you can have a card that sits around for a year and then decides to do something, and the service can still handle it. And generally, a little bit about the backend architecture. Cards themselves, the definition for a power card, we call it power cards, not the official product name, it's just shorthand. They're first-class Dataverse entities, so they sit within Dataverse alongside their connectors and solutions that they may be a part of. So if you are a Power Apps or Power Platform solution developer, you can embed cards into solutions as well. And then what happens when you send a card is it turns from a card definition kept in the Dataverse to a live card instance, which is a separate entity in the Dataverse. And that keeps its state in Cosmos DB, which is, again, it's a global database managed by Microsoft. So it scales with you transparently. You don't have to go set it up and tell it to scale. And so the card engine is basically implements the app model. It uses PowerFX as a programming language. I'll give a little demo of that. PowerFX can do some really fantastic kind of exotic stuff if you're a language nerd like me, but it's also good for doing very simple. My goal is to try to do as many cards that are 3 lines of PowerFX. And then there's the card designer, which is going to look very familiar to all of you because it's really sort of a overlay on top of the adaptive cards designer. We actually share code with the adaptive cards core designer, and we refresh and pull all the new features into our branch as time goes by. And then another thing we're working on, I'm only going to give a few peeks at this because it's going to be out after the Power Automate stuff is delivered. But we're doing a card gallery, which will be for users to browse. What cards can I send? Hey, I want to send a purchase order approval to my boss, and I want to drop it into our one-on-one so that they don't miss it, and we don't have to talk about it next week. So the card gallery is really important over time, but we think, and we'd love to hear from you, that most card usage is going to be driven by automation initially. I think once people see what you can do and how much efficiency you can drive by solving things in a chat, we want to see people freely sending cards back and forth, collecting cards, and then really important things like remix. Hey, someone used this cool card with me. That was so efficient for assigning a ticket in our daily scrum. I'd like to remix this card to add one more field onto it. So we will be adding a single button that you can hit on any card that'll take you into the designer so you can make your own version of it. Yeah, we're excited about this stuff. Okay, so let's flip over to a little bit of demo. Standard live coding, excuses, and terror. But this is all pretty simple. I've done this demo quite a few times. I usually make the same mistakes every time, but the mistakes are actually super helpful as well. So let me just share out my browser window, and we'll get a look at what this thing looks like. Love to hear maybe people can clap or something if they've used this the Power Cards Designer before, or shout. You can uncloak if you like, or put it in the chat. Okay, I see 2. We got at least 2 folks who have given it a try. It's missing all kinds of stuff. It's got bugs all over the place. This is what the nature of preview code. But I hope that you've gotten far enough in to kind of get a sense for what it's about, and really the philosophy that we're trying to hold to in building the user experience. I'm actually a hardcore UX guy. My last job before I came back to Microsoft was as head of UX design at PlayStation. So I'm really into consumer quality UI. We want to solve the details so you don't have to, and it's really fun to bring that eye to programming tools. Okay, so here I am, top level of the Power Apps portal. I'm going to go into cards section here. You might have to go into the more section to find your cards. I just pinned it to the top for myself. We'll go ahead and make a new card from scratch. And it will be yet another shopping list. No, I'll just call it Shoppy. Okay, so first, let's just do a quick walkthrough. A lot of the stuff is hopefully self-explanatory, but we do use some sort of Power Apps conventions for organizing the UI. So on the left here, you see the 4 main sections. We've got a tree view that shows you the outline of your UI. We've got an insert menu, which lets you put in different UI elements. One of my favorite things about adaptive cards is that it's a fairly short list of elements. We have a data tab, which you can use to bring in connectors from across the Power Platform. So there are more than 800 connectors are on the Power Apps platform today. Almost every sort of interesting third-party database is available here. Connectors let you bring data in, write data out, and also do operations that are unique to that connector. For example, there's a connector that lets you access a lot of Office data. So you can do things like look up someone's email in the chat and send them an email automatically on the side, things like that. So connectors are super fun. We're rolling them out slowly. We're doing some pretty deep performance work in a caching layer that sort of deals with the interaction between connectors and IntelliSense and PowerFX. Once we get that worked out and have done a lot of sort of security testing in Teams, we'll be rolling out the full suite of connectors. In today's build, you can use the Dataverse connector, and it's a little slow right now. That's why we're doing this performance work. So if you're trying to use the Dataverse connector and you get a little stuck and it seems like it's frozen, some operations take as long as 15 seconds. That's going to be gone by February, probably well before it. Absolutely, you can talk to Azure SQL. So yeah, if I recommend just Google Power Platform connectors, and you can see the huge lists of documentation, and it's a really vibrant ecosystem, and that's a very cool thing about it. But yeah, the ability to read and write data and then to perform actions is pretty incredible with connectors. It's also a way to expose your own custom in-house functionality to the Power Platform, so you can program it through PowerFX. And then we have a variable section down here. No big surprises here, but let's look at the types of variables that we support. So you have text, number, a record. You could think of this as a row in a spreadsheet. Dates, the standard adaptive cards types, but also table. And table is a good hint of kind of where we're going with Dataverse integration. And now if people work with other data sources, we want to make that as easy as possible as well. But since we know that cards sit on top of a Dataverse infrastructure, we want to make it really easy to just pull in a table that exists already. So some of what I'm going to show you here is not as easy as it's going to be very soon. But this does illustrate like some of the guts of what's going on here. So let me walk through a little bit more detail of what's up in this variable panel. So of course, you can name a variable. So I'm going to make one called my items. And I'm going to make it a table. And this table, I'm going to build a little card that just does a shopping list, just so we can get into a little bit of interactive programming. And so the shopping list is going to be a table, but it's only going to have one row for the name of the item I'm putting in there. We can go and add quantity later if we want to. But first, let's look at these two choices. So we have persistence of variables. So there might be a variable that I just use for a quick calculation that's only for one user who's looking at the card right now. In that case, just use a temporary variable, or don't need it afterwards. Permanent variable is super interesting and sort of illustrates something about how cards life cycle works. Remember I talked about you have a card definition and then you turn it into a card instance, and then people are using the card instance and you can share it with many different people. You can put it into different Teams chats and it'll be that same instance. You can put it into an Outlook email and it will be that same instance. And what that means is all these permanent variables are all available to that instance wherever it goes. Even if it goes onto Instagram, we're not working with Instagram on that, but theoretically that could happen. But more importantly, like in your own apps. And so you can think of these variables as like a permanent sort of bag of data that is moving all around with your card everywhere. And then when you make a new instance, it has its own initially empty bag of data. Okay, and then some other stuff here, customization. So we're using customization with a very specific meaning. Because we're designed from the start to integrate with Power Automate, we use Power Automate's parameter passing and receiving capabilities. So when you do get that Power Automate connector around February, and probably peek at it sooner, when you are calling a card from Power Automate, you'll be able to pass parameters into that card using the standard dropdowns and input fields of Power Automate. And also when you come back from when that card returns, you'll have an output block, so you can wire variables coming out of that card back into the rest of your flow. Thank you for the positive feedback. I love that. Funny story, we were working with a huge customer externally, and just the other day, it was a big executive review, and we use a lot of hearts in our chats. We're a very friendly bunch, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't know you could do hearts in Teams. That's very interesting." So that's funny stuff. So they're about variables, really designed from the start. The engine is designed from the start to integrate with Power Automate. We want that to be really seamless. But input variables have a really interesting, different meaning. So I talk about, hey, I want to use a card and I want to send data from my flow into that card. You can just plug them into the parameter block. What happens when a human being, Joe, sends a card to their friend Sam over Teams? Well, what happens then is when they send that card, it'll say, hey, I need some inputs to run. And we'll then present what we call a customization stage where you can fill in those parameters. And of course, you can fill in simple numbers like, oh, I need to specify how many, lines to have in this purchase order. So I could put in a 10 here. But we are also, over time, this is going to be later next year, working on rich types for input. So imagine that you have a card that expects a purchase order from an SAP database. And someone sends that card to someone else. As they send it, it'll say, hey, I need a purchase order, and then it'll pop up GUI to let you pick a purchase order out of that SAP database. We'll be doing that using the powerapps connector infrastructure, but that's a great way to think of it as powerapps. The connectors, what they do is they turn external data sources into little bits of UI, and so we'll be leveraging those within Power Cards. That's a longer term thing now. So and it's a nerdy thing, so I'll move on to the rest of the demo here. So we're gonna make a little shopping list, favorites, and so you remember that we created a table, or I started to. Let's make sure I actually finished it. No, I didn't. Okay, so I'm gonna make first a data structure to put my shopping list items in. So I'm gonna call it my items, because that seems appropriate, and I'm gonna set it to type of table. I'm going to set it to type of permanent because I want to keep those items around. I want to be able to add to it, take away from it, put this card away in my purse for a week, and then come back later and it's there. And I also just sometimes set things to permanent. Won't be doing anything with C# and Visual Studio. That is very interesting to us over the long term, but we're going to be focused on just this IDE today. Now one thing that I have to do today, which you will not have to do tomorrow, is I have to kind of bootstrap this table because PowerFX wants to know which columns are in the table. Now, right now it's an empty table, and in PowerApps, one of our other designers, it will automatically infer from your usage what rows are in the table. We just haven't got that code in yet. Actually, I think it was just checked in yesterday. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to manually initialize the table. And I'm just going to make it have one item in it. So the square braces introduce the table, and it's just going to have one column for name. And I will start with granola in my shopping list because I do love me some granola. And so that's a really simple table with one row and one column. In 2 months, this step won't exist because you will be able to tell when you start using the table what rows it should have in it. We just haven't added that step yet. But for now, I'll save it. And this can be very handy if you want to initialize with some complex data for your app. Okay, so that looks pretty decent. I'll save that off. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand my window a little bit. Please shout, clap, or something if that made this too hard to read. I know I have a very big monitor. Hopefully this is still readable. If not, I'll squish it up a little bit. Actually, let me do this. I can turn that down. I can squish it up a little bit right now. Okay, hopefully that's optimal reading. It is nice also to have an IDE that you can make this small and still get stuff done. Okay, so now we're going to do our first fancy thing with this text block here. So this is every card you make, it just has these two text items in it right away to just kind of give you a bootstrap on how GUI editing works. So what I want this text item to be is every item in my shopping list. So if I'm ordering coffee filters, batteries, Xbox controllers, whatever, I want to repeat this text item for every item in my shopping list. And so you can do this with adaptive cards. We're doing it in a slightly different way, same underlying concept here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the advanced properties for this text label, and I'm going to tell it that I want it to repeat for every item in my shopping list. And so I turn on repeat for every here. And what I want to put in here is this table variable that I have over here. Now, I could just type in like a literal list of things, but I don't want to do that. I want to pull in a variable. And so I'm going to do this by turning this into a PowerFX field by just typing an equals sign. And so that says whatever follows is a little bit of PowerFX. This could be a compound expression, but we're just going to pull in the variable my items. And so now this text item is going to repeat for every row in that table. And since I only put one thing in it, it's going to say granola. unless I, messed something up, which is likely and always entertaining. I'm just going to style this a little bit. If you guys are probably familiar with adaptive card styling, it's abstract styling. You specify the type of color you want, and then the local operating system decides what exact color to give you back. I happen to love that, but it's can be a challenge for people who are just learning the model. And let's make it big since it's the primary information on the card. Okay, so let's save this, and here's the fun part, is now I can press play. Okay, so playing, remember what's doing, it's fetching that card definition out of Dataverse and making an instance. And that instance now has a little bag of data that carries around with it. So I could actually take this card right here, paste it in Teams, and it will unfurl and you can interact with it. I'm not going to do that now because we have a bug right now with really large groups in Teams, but where we're going for, this is why we're out there. We have about 20 devs working on this, really getting it hardened and globally scaled. It's super fun. Okay, so you see here, I said to repeat the item once for every item in my list. It did, but it repeated that same item, which is obviously not what I wanted, to just show that blank text. So now what I wanted to do is show the name of the item that it's looking at. And so the way we do that is we go up here, I have the text label selected. What I want to do is change the text that's in it to be a PowerFX expression. I'll go over here and edit it here since this is a little easier to see. So the PowerFX expression, I really just want to basically say equals the name of whichever item I'm currently iterating over. And we have a special variable for the current item I'm iterating over, which is called this item. And so if I say this item.name, they save, and there's full IntelliSense on here, so it'll tell you when you mess things up, and I'll give you a little helpful corrections. One feature I just saw demoed, which we'll be getting a little bit later, is natural language error correction here. The example I saw was someone just typing what is 3 times 60 and having it turn that into the valid PowerFX. That's just part of PowerFX, but it's one of the things we get from the deep integration we're doing. Okay, so if I play now, I should see a shopping list with granola. Okay, that is incredibly exciting. I know I'm going to make $1 billion off this app. But let's make it a little more fun. So I'm going to put in the ability to add new items to my shopping list. So text input will do it. One of the things we do is we have this approach where every item has a name, and that name becomes a PowerFX variable. So this input field I'm going to call new item, and then I can reference it from my PowerFX. And I can also, it's a standard adaptive cards text input, so I can say enter new item here, and I'll get a nice little label. And then I want a button to actually make that adding it to the list happen. So I'll drag a button over here, and I'll call it add. So this, I don't know about you guys, this stuff just delights me. GUI environments where you can switch back and forth between visual design and coding, because that's been my whole career, switching back and forth between design and coding. So the add here's where the money meets the road. I want to show you the PowerFX for adding this new item to my existing list of items. Okay, so we're going to use a thing called collect. PowerFX is very kind of data oriented. You're always collecting things into other things. So the thing I want to collect into is my items. Makes sense? And the thing I want to collect is basically a new row that just has that name in it. And so the way I'm going to do that is say, I'm going to start just a new object, new JSON object right here in line. And it's going to have a name. And that name is going to come from this item dot name. Oh, wrong error. I'm not working with this item because I'm not inside an iteration right now. Where I actually want to get this, this name is from this field here. So I'll call that field new item. I haven't named it yet, so PowerFX is going to bark at me a little bit that that's not an existing variable, or should. I'm still working things out, unless I did name it. But let me save real quick here. So here's the field where users can type in the new item. Oh, I did name it already. Okay. So there on my add button, it says collect the name from the new item and put it into my items. And that's it. So that's a one-line card here. PowerFX, you'll see some PowerFX over your career that's like, wow, that is like PhD level stuff. PowerFX can do some amazing things in one line of code. That line of code tends to sound like, gibberish. But for straightforward things, PowerFX can be very clean and really kind of aesthetic, which I like. And it's also super powerful and getting more powerful all the time. It's a big area of investment for us, so expect tons of new magic to come into PowerFX in the year ahead. So now, am I ready to add batteries to my shopping list? Yay! Okay, so that's working pretty well. JP, I don't want to compress your end of the talk too much. Can I get another 5 minutes?
Absolutely. Take your time.
Okay.
People are loving the demo.
Yay! So now I want to show you this. This was a bit of medicine we were doing in this one, which is addressing the pain point of cards that have multiple states. Because we were going into security and we were really interested in multi-user scenarios, multiple people using the same card simultaneously, we naturally got into, well, you need to be able to have sort of different views for different people. For example, think of an onboarding card. It's your first day at work. We're going to send you some cards to fill out some stuff. But first, we're going to ask you if you're in engineering or design. We're going to route you to a different card based on that. We want that to be really easy and natural. So if I go over to the tree view, we got this thing up here called New Screen. New screen, I'm gonna pretend I'm doing an e-commerce card and I'll just do a checkout screen. Okay, so I'll call it checkout. And so this is a new screen inside the card. Now everyone here is thinking, why didn't you call it a deck of cards? And then you could have cards in a deck and it would be a totally cool metaphor. We tried, it just didn't work. Like the documentation got too weird. So we have cards with multiple screens, also match power apps that have multiple screens. But you can think of them as multiple cards in a whole deck. So here's checkout. We got a brand new card here. And what we're gonna say is, first we wanna say how many items there are in the card. So I'm going to go up here in the PowerFX editor on this text field. I'm going to say equals. I'm going to use this special string format that PowerFX does. It's $quote. What $quote says is things like you have this many items in your card. So it's basically a string interpolation. And so what I can do is I can put a PowerFX expression inside these quotes. And so this will be just a literal part of the string, then it'll evaluate a little PowerFX in here, and then the rest of it will be literal. So like this, how many times have I typed this exact string at how many companies? You have X items in your card. So let's think about how do we know how many items we have? Well, we have that table called my items. So there's probably something, and I'll just skip because I know there's a PowerFX function called count rows, and we'll call it on my items. And that should give us the number of items that are in the card. And then here, we're just going to do the same thing we did on the first page, which is say, this is going to be this item name, and it's going to repeat for every in my items, and make sure that's evaluated as PowerFX. You can watch for this little PowerFX symbol, lets you know this field's going to be evaluated as opposed to just being treated as static data. Okay, that's probably got only a couple of errors in it. I'm going to change this item.name to be a different color, so it's really obvious to us when we switch screens. I'm in the test environment, so it's a little slower to load and save. Anthony can correct me if I'm wrong about that. And so let's go to our color is attention, which is nice red, bold, which just makes everything look better, and not quite extra large, but large is fine. And we'll add on a fake button that does nothing. It says purchase, just so it looks cool. And make that say purchase. And then how do I get from the first card to the second card? Well, you can use, there's a built-in adaptive cards verb called navigate, I believe. We've also exposed that as PowerFX. So if I go back to my main card here, I'm going to add a button for checkout. Insert screen, input button, and I'll call it checkout. And then I will say that I want that to call the PowerFX version navigate, and I just give it the name of my checkout screen. And again, since we have IntelliSense, it knows that I've got a variable called checkout, so I can put that in here. So you can see how everything, all the UI elements, all the screens, everything's exposed to PowerFX, so you can do a lot of cool stuff. So let's see, checkout button goes to the next screen, add button works, and let's just see how this holds up. one of the things you'll probably notice if you go and play with this stuff is that our error messages are often lacking. We just haven't gotten to all of them. So there'll be a lot of cases where like you'll get sort of these something happened sort of errors, but know that we consider errors to be a really important part of the learning process. So we're working to get a lot more detailed errors that help explain to you what's going on. Okay, so there I added an item and I'll go to checkout and it's taking me to, an error. That's awesome. But you can see I got to the next screen. There's an error in my header that calculates how many items are in the cart. Name is invalid. My items. Oh, it looks like a simple typo. No, it doesn't. To make sure, I'll switch over to my variable. It is in fact called my underscore items. I might not debug this whole thing just because you guys have been very generous letting me go way over my allotted time.
Man, I think in the checkout screen you put my items without an underscore.
Oh, thank you. I'm looking at the wrong screen. That's why I didn't see the error. Okay. This is a test. You passed. You're hired. Thank you. I love pair programming. It is like the coolest thing in the world. I don't know why it hasn't caught on. It's been a more mainstream thing. Okay, let's get some tea because maybe I've had enough coffee today. And we'll go check out. You got 2 items in your cart. Ta-da! So, this is like a real sweet spot for us. You don't necessarily build this huge line of business mainstream hub application in a card. But if you need to like gather a bit of data, do some calculations, show a few things to a few different people, and then write some data back to a database, that is where we live. That's what we're all about. We're going to be doing a lot to really harden those flows, make them high performance, incredibly secure and manageable over the year ahead. So it's super fun, and I really, really appreciate you guys letting me share some of this stuff.
No, thank you, Matt. And also thank you, Anthony. You guys have been great. Matt has shared an awesome demo. Anthony has been in the chat answering all the questions we've been getting. I think that's awesome. Thank you. Thank you for joining us here.
You bet.
Let's hop over to the Q&A. I'll take a look at chat on the saved questions that I have here, and we can get started with those. So there was one question that came in asking, is PowerFX used for binding expressions in templates? It was answered in the chat, but if we could just provide an answer for the people watching the recording, that would be awesome. And Matt or Anthony, feel free to just go off mute and share.
Yeah, I answered this in the chat, so I can answer it over the call as well. It is used for binding expressions. You saw Matt do that earlier when he used the text label to do the count row expression, which is a PFX expression. And we also use that same pattern for how you do that kind of list organization. So you saw Matt added the table as the repeat for every property, and then also added the this item paradigm to show the different values there, this item.name, I think, in particular. So that's kind of that same PFX pattern you see in galleries as well that we're doing there.
Awesome, thank you. Craig is asking, besides the screen card background being white, is there something we can do to fill it with a background image?
Yeah, there was some later conversation about this, but card screens support the same background image setting that adaptive cards does. So if you click on the card screen in the tree view, on the properties pane, there'll be a toggle at the bottom right of the properties pane called background image. You can use that to set an image URL. It has to be publicly accessible, course compliant, of course, the same way adaptive cards requires. But you can use that to set an image there. One of the kind of broader work streams we have in the future, like post-April timeframe, is about how do we enable media from data sources to work better. Right now, cards are limited to publicly accessible media content, which can be quite restrictive. And so being able to bring in, even simple things like the profile picture you have in your Office 365 gallery or gal, right? Like that's something we want to bring able to do. So making sure that we can have cards support that as one of our future work items for sure.
So Anthony, basically right now, nothing that we can pull in from an image from a SharePoint URL then?
Unless your SharePoint image URL is a public accessible course compliant link, no. I think it's possible to get that, but I'm not 100% positive. You can set up a service to pull it and then make it accessible in a blob storage, but it's non-trivial and so probably not what you want to be doing. So no, basically no.
Awesome. We did have some questions regarding how users can provide feedback or if they're experiencing any bugs. Anthony recommended that the best way to go about this is just to submit a ticket in the admin center, a support ticket. There's multiple teams that are involved in this, so finding the right team is difficult, and there is no easy way to do that. So a support ticket in the admin center would be the best way to get some support or file any bugs that you're experiencing with this.
Yeah, just to add to that answer, that was specifically for if you're using the Power Automate connector to send adaptive cards today. That's kind of like a cross-team thing. If you're hitting issues or bugs within the cards designer that Matt showed off today, or playing cards in that designer, or sending those cards through Teams, feel free to reach out to either one of us directly. We're looking to add kind of in-product feedback things like a report a bug thing that Teams has today. But if you hit any issues in the things that Matt was demoing today, feel free to reach out to us directly.
Yes, and in the beginning of the recording, Matt shared infos on how you can contact them. So feel free to reference that as well.
Just a quick favor request. If you do have a scenario in mind for adaptive cards, I would love to see a one-liner of it in the chats. We are putting a lot of energy into testing deeper and deeper scenarios, and we would love to have your scenarios kind of in our heads when we're designing the tests. You can also email them to me.
Yeah, please do. I know people have been sharing a lot of feedback in the chat for Matt and his team to take a look at. This is super helpful. The user feedback we get in calls like this really helps us improve our product and improve the experiences, and also listen to what you guys are looking for in this. Awesome. Looks like we have caught up with all the questions in chat. And we'll wrap things up. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Anthony, for joining us here and sharing such an awesome demo. This was great.